Welcome to the For the Love of Language podcast. I'm EJ.
And I'm Stacy. Happy New Year, everybody. This is our first podcast of 2023.
Yeah, I think I might have released one a week or two ago, but we
This is the
recorded
first
it.
one. Yeah, this is the first one we're recording in 2023.
Yeah, we took a nice long break for the holidays, so it's good to
Yes.
be back.
Hope all of you are safe and sound and enjoyed time with friends and loved ones with whatever it is you celebrate, or even if you didn't celebrate anything, hope you had a good couple of weeks.
Right? And that it continues to be good, that it continues to be
Yeah.
great.
Yes. We are into 2023 and we have a fun topic today, don't we, EJ?
We do. We're going to talk about jargon.
Yeah, jargon. So, jargon is also called domain specific language and is essentially just specific words or phrases or acronyms, things that you use with certain groups. And so that could be in work, with your friends, within like other specific environments. And we're just going to kind of lay out a few of them today and kind of talk about why these things come up in the first place. EJ, would you like to share some jargon that you kind of use in certain groups?
Sure. Jargon in my life, I feel like all sorts of specific things that I do have their own jargon. So, like, my work definitely has its own jargon, martial arts, fitness, climbing. I mean, even podcasting, I feel like, has its own jargon that
Yeah.
we could dive into a little bit. So, kind of interesting. So, what happens is whenever you start something new, I feel like not only are you learning how to do something, but you're learning all of the language around it. So you'll get the classic, I don't know, snowboarder shredding the gnar. When I first heard that, I was like, what on earth does that even mean?
Uh-huh.
Ooh, but it's just like doing awesome stuff on a snowboard.
Yeah.
Or, in climbing, you can match on a hold, which means you put both of your hands on that hold. Or there's just a lot of specific things that people forget that they did at one point actually have to learn, and that it's not something that everybody just knows.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we just did a little collaborative podcast with our capoeira friends. And capoeira is kind of interesting because it has its own jargon along with another language. And it has like jargon in that specific language as well, right? Like there are some things that you can say in a capoeira setting that are perfectly fine. But like if you said them to just like a regular Brazilian, they would have no idea what you're talking about, or it could be potentially offensive, right?
Mm.
And so there's situations like that. Another popular form of jargon that some people are kind of unaware of that has bled into like people's everyday lives is like military jargon. So the military has very specific jargon. They use a lot of acronyms, and some of those acronyms have like bled into our everyday lives. Things like as soon as possible, or MIA, missing in action, or AWOL, absent without leave. Those are all like military things that have kind of bled into our everyday lives. But then you go and like, if you're in the military proper, I'm from a military family, and those like once you're in that setting, imagine there's just so many more acronyms that get placed on top of those kinds of things. And so it's really interesting how people kind of have to like pick that up, and all of these different like imagine any group that you're in, any type of group that you're in is going to have its own jargon. Even different friend groups, people will often have different ways of speaking to those friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and even the same person is going to consciously at times speak differently. Like if I'm talking about my job as a software engineer with people who aren't software engineers, I'm going to talk about it very differently than if I am talking to people who are software engineers and who know the concepts that I'm referring to. So,
Yeah, you can't just go up to any stranger and be like, yo, I built this on a Raspberry Pi and it's sick. And people are like, you did what with a pie?
right? A Raspberry Pi, for those who aren't familiar, is like a tiny little computer that you can program fun stuff on.
I barely understand it myself. I just know that that's a word that software engineers use.
I was gonna say, what do you know about Raspberry Pis? But
Not much. I know that there's Raspberry Pis and there's pineapples and other stuff. But maybe let's dive into a little bit about why jargon is a thing. Jargon is, like we said, a very natural phenomenon, and it comes primarily from the fact that humans are social creatures. And we like to, when we're a part of groups, we like to feel like we belong. And having unique group identifiers, specifically through like language, I mean, you get unique group identifiers and other things with like, style and mannerisms and stuff, but since language is our primary form of communication, jargon is a really good way for people to identify, oh, they know about this, they belong here. And that kind of makes us feel included.
Definitely. And there's also kind of a practical aspect to it as well. So, I mean, this is a linguistics podcast. We're using linguistics jargon a lot, probably, semantics, pragmatics, morphology, syntax. Those aren't words that people outside of linguistics are necessarily going to have, fully defined the way that linguists do. But as linguists, it's a lot easier to say, oh, let's talk about pragmatics. And
Mm-hmm.
Stacy and I know exactly what that is versus trying to give like the entire definition that we did an entire episode on of
Yeah.
semantics versus pragmatics. So sometimes there's something very practical to, like, if you're working in this field, it's really nice to have a simple, fast term that you can use rather than having to, describe something all the time.
Yeah, they're like little language shortcuts. And what's really cool about people is we've found these little language shortcuts for like a bunch of different things. Like even in like your little friend groups, you can reference like an inside joke with like a single word. Or, you can do other things just by like referencing something. And, we're just so good at naming things and coming up with these phrases for stuff that it allows for very quick and efficient communication.
Definitely. Do you have any favorite jargon?
I mean, there's plenty of linguistics jargon that I absolutely love. It's always funny talking about the different parts of the mouth with people, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, fun little bilabial fricative, and people are like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, your alveolar ridge. It's like the best part of your mouth, and they're like, oh, what are you smoking? And then, of course, there's like capoeira terms that I love that I wish I could use all the time with people and have them understand, but that doesn't always happen. There's also like, I'm into gaming now, and it took me a little while, but I had to learn some of the gaming jargon, like F's in chat, or that's more of like streaming jargon, F's in chat, or all of this other stuff. My mind is like blanking right now, but.
I had a gaming one actually. I think I was playing Dominion online with some friends,
Yeah.
and someone made a comment about like, let's nerf that.
Ah,
Just,
yes.
like talking about something, and I'm like, nerf? Is that an
Uh-huh.
acronym? And like nerfing is the concept of like a Nerf gun versus a real gun is like you're weakening it, you're
Hmm.
making something maybe more fair by making it less powerful and fit in the game better. Like there's all sorts of contextual things you could apply to it, but like
Oh,
the
yeah.
idea is actually from a Nerf gun, and I didn't know that, so I had to
There
ask.
you go. Yeah, and what's funny is like, even within the gaming community, each game is going to have its own jargon as well because every game has its own unique mechanics.
Well, and you can even have world building.
Hmm.
So think about like Harry Potter,
Yeah.
J.K. Rowling, cool author.
Well, not so cool anymore, but
There, things have gotten. She's made some interesting political statements. Yes,
anyway.
but her books are cool. I try not to keep up with politics too much, but anyway, you can say the word Muggle, and almost everyone is going to know exactly what you're talking about, even though that's just a word that she made up for her imaginary universe,
Yeah.
right? Or there's actually, I'm sure, like a ton of different words that she coined in those books.
Hmm.
Probably, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars. There's all sorts of concepts that we've pulled from those, and now there's probably a ton of people using them without even realizing where they originally come from.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like the military jargon, like we talked about too. Sometimes it like spreads and diffuses into like everyday language, and then like when that happens, then the jargon that's a unique identifier then just becomes a little bit more specific or a little more detailed. So like as some jargon kind of diffuses into like everyday language, the community will still come together and have other bits and pieces as unique identifiers as well. So, like, gaps are always going to be filled and things are always going to diffuse. It's kind of an interesting, like, societal flow of how language kind of moves in between groups and out in larger communities. And it's something that's still kind of relatively new, especially since like global communication is still like relatively new. So seeing how like I know for a fact that there are people out there who are studying how some of these phrases will like diffuse into larger communities with the assistance of things like the internet and memes and like all this stuff that can take something that was like a jargon specific, domain specific to a certain group or to certain society, and then it just gets broadcast across the world. And so watching how those patterns happen is a really kind of fun and novel thing that's happening in the world with like jargon.
Yeah, and that actually brings up something interesting. Like, jargon has always existed
Oh
and
yeah.
is always going to exist. But, if you look back a couple hundred years, it is extremely difficult to find out, how many times is this word used in this book, right?
Hmm.
But if you want to solve that kind of problem now, you can do it in like 2 minutes by getting the online version and then just doing a word count, right?
Hmm.
So there's like a ton of statistical patterns and actually data around word usage that like now we can study how words evolved even from books in the 1800s,
Yeah.
but back in the 1800s that would have been a lot more difficult to actually see in real time. And I think a byproduct of the fact that it's so easy for us to get that data so fast is that more people and more companies are actively trying to manipulate it,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like you get, politicians framing things certain ways to try and gain traction and sway opinion just with the words that they're using. And it's a little bit insane how quickly some things can catch on with how communication is today.
Yeah, no, modern communication is completely different than it was 100 years ago. And, 100 years ago, jargon would be very specific and not many people would know about it. But like you can do a quick Google search right now and figure out all of the words for like a specific group. And so some secret languages, I'm air quoting here, secret languages aren't really secret anymore because the world is becoming just a massively public place. I mean, before we started recording, EJ had mentioned even talking about like religious language, which is another like domain specific thing. But something that I've even noticed, especially on like TikTok, is that more people are talking about religious language and how it's been used in like the past and the present. And even that is becoming like more public and apparent. And so people who might not have had access or have known about certain like religious language can now just kind of like look on TikTok, they use the hashtag, and all of a sudden they can kind of learn about some of these like religion specific terms from people who want to talk about those types of things. So it's really interesting how everything is becoming just so open, and those like secret languages aren't super secret, or those things that would normally be closed off to people now it's as if it's open access for all.
Right. It's a lot harder to like climb into your treehouse and pull up the ladder and say, this is just for us.
Yeah. Which, I mean, for some groups might be kind of bad, where, having access to their language might trivialize it. But in some cases, with anything that is secret, there can be, some negative things attached to it. So by making it public, people are, outing things like, Nazis and white supremacists and, a bunch of other like harmful things that can kind of come about. There's this one person I follow on TikTok. His primary content is talking about dog whistles. I don't know if you know what dog whistles are, but dog whistles are kind of like a secret code of like a word or a series of numbers that people who are in certain groups use to communicate with each other, like online. And a lot of those usually have like negative connotations, like anti-Semitic connotations and stuff. But there are a few out there that are like positive ones as well. And but by making those public, people can know if those dog whistles are being used in their comments section, and can, block the user if they're, not in agreement with what they're talking about or anything. And so there's kind of like layers to like jargon and secret language and how groups can use these things. And by making it public, it can have like impacts in certain communities too.
Right. I think you also have to be careful though, because there's so many different groups that probably like have these things where, oh, if I say this, it means this. And you could have someone that just has no idea and uses those words without, associating whatever you've attached it to. I remember there was a time in high school I had a British teacher, and I had no idea that the peace sign backwards is actually like a extremely rude and inappropriate.
Yes, it is the British equivalent of the American middle finger.
It is. And so I had just like made the peace sign in class for something, I thought. And she was just like, her reaction was not what I expected. We'll just put it that way. I learned very quickly that was not a thing that I should be doing. But it wasn't that I was deliberately trying to be offensive or anything. I just, didn't know, because I came from a bit different background. And so I think if you're talking about these jargon type things, you do have to know the background of the person that you're speaking to. And, I don't think, you can get false positives and false negatives for anything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that the guy on TikTok who does the dog whistles was talking about as well. Like, dog whistles specifically for groups are meant to be like innocuous and like hidden in plain sight sort of a thing. And so people might use them just in like, your everyday life and not know about it. And that's kind of how it's supposed to be. That's why it's like, secret or whatever. But I mean, that happens just in everyday life as well, right? There's always going to be like miscommunication, misunderstanding, a use of a term that, you think means one thing, but actually means another thing. And as beautiful and efficient as human language is, it comes with a lot of faults, right? There is a lot of miscommunication and misinterpretation of all sorts of things. And when in the right groups, your jargon will make things just like super easy. Adapting to different groups and navigating those points of miscommunication can allow for like better connection between people and can like, foster a different sense of community and navigating misunderstandings. And how you navigate misunderstandings also says a lot about you as a person. But it is really interesting that the dance that we do between groups and using language amongst everybody to just to fit in. We all just want to fit in at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah, it's super interesting. I want to touch back on something you mentioned, right? Because
Yeah.
we just talked about, how it can be really positive to bring these things to light and like especially if there is something, negative, maybe if it's like a gain or something, it's good for people to be able to recognize that.
Yeah.
And probably good for like, law enforcement and stuff to be aware of those signs and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But on the opposite side of that spectrum, you kind of tangentially mentioned, there might be some good things that are coming to light as well. And I think the biggest argument that I have heard for jargon remaining, strictly for the people of that culture is,
Yeah, private.
yeah, remaining private to that group, like only if you're a part of that group is, I mean, definitely if there's privacy concerns, stuff like that. But also there's the argument of sacredness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Especially when it comes to religious things. That was, something growing up LDS. There's really strict requirements for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to enter into temples. Churches, anybody can enter into, but to enter the temple, you have to be an active member of the church and meet like a ton of different requirements. And what they always say is that, it's not because it's secret per se, it's because it's sacred. And a lot of people have mixed feelings about that argument, especially if you've come from that and left it. But the same thing can be said for, there's a lot of indigenous
Mm-hmm.
tribes that want their rituals and their services and different things to belong just to them. They don't want it to be disrespected by outsiders. And so
Yeah.
I think that's also, a really interesting thing when it comes to, it's a little bit bigger than just jargon,
Yeah.
but there is, jargon and language is a really big part of that of, I don't know, maybe there are times when it does make sense to keep it in a group.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, like you mentioned, indigenous groups or other groups, there's often, different like micro cultures within like other cultures who prefer to have what they call closed practices. And those are things that they want to remain private to their like unique communities. And a lot of those times those are out of like self-preservation, especially with like indigenous communities where even in some indigenous communities in Europe, those practices kind of get out, and all of a sudden things are getting like appropriated in like inappropriate ways or twisted. A popular one that kind of came about was this like Hawaiian apology. It's kind of it's circulated amongst like people who practice like new age stuff, but it was this like idea of what a proper apology was in like Hawaiian culture that then other people heard about and they took and then they misinterpreted it and twisted it, and it's no longer reflective of what actually happens in like Hawaiian culture with like a proper apology, right? And so stuff like that, certain groups would prefer to just keep within their closed practices for good reason, because they don't want things getting misinterpreted or twisted and then become like a bastardization or a poor reflection of their personal beliefs and their culture, right? So definitely there are moments where things should be kind of closed off and protected. So where, on one side, it's great to know about some of these things. On the other side, people who have been harmed by having their culture broadcast to the world, by having it twisted, we should be respectful of people who want to keep certain things within their culture to themselves. But again, it's that delicate balance in the world that, I mean, especially in such a global age, we're still trying to figure out how to balance everything out and how to be respectful of certain people while also, calling out things that could be really harmful. And it's just, society is a complicated thing.
Right? It is. It is. And I generally have a hard time with the idea of appropriation because like if you were to say, you know what? I'm an American. I was born American, therefore everything I do will just be American. Like, what would I be eating burgers and brownies all day? Like, what would that life actually look like? But I think where appropriation is a thing, a lot of the time comes down to like respect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think for the most part that it's fair to say like, oh, this is, my thing from this culture, therefore you can't do it, you can't say it. Like we had a little bit of that that discussion around capoeira. Like, is
Yeah.
it okay for other people to come in and play capoeira? Is it okay for a non-Chinese person to practice kung fu, for a
Mm-hmm.
non-Japanese person to do karate? Like, there's all of these things that you can go to extremes, right?
Yes.
Like you can go to the extreme of political correctness and say like, oh, that's not mine, that's theirs, therefore I'm never going to touch it. And you end up just living in this tiny little bubble.
Yeah.
Go to the extreme of saying everything is mine and I'm going to disregard the origins and be disrespectful of it. And both of those are really negative. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like discussions of appropriation tend to be really frustrating to me because it tends to be people on those extremes.
Uh, yes, I 100% agree.
That was like definitely a tangent and maybe like an unnecessary soapbox here, but
Look, I personally don't think so because when we're talking about things like jargon is very closely related to culture and to specific stuff. And when we're talking about, domain specific language, like this kind of thing is important. And that whole idea of like appropriation and globalization and, what it kind of comes down to at the end of the day, it just boils down to respect and listening to the people of those groups and hearing what they want and hearing how, to if you're going to do something, if there is a certain way to do it respectfully, properly, like at the end of the day, that's just kind of what it comes down to. And it's that happy medium, kind of just like what we've been talking about of like there's so many extremes in the world, and finding that happy medium between all of these extremes is kind of just what living is all about at the end of the day, in my opinion. But yeah, definitely approaching these things with respect and with kindness is first and foremost. And I think both EJ and I come from a place where respect and kindness are like top of the list of priorities.
Try. Yeah.
I would think we both try. I mean, and we're at the end of the day, we're only human. But especially when like you and I, we both have linguistics backgrounds. We've dealt with people from variety of like situations. Coming from a place of respect goes a long way when just dealing with people and sensitive subjects and all that stuff. We talked about this a little bit with taboo language as well. Like come from a place of like respect, listening to people, that kind of a thing. It goes very far. Goes very far. And learning to adapt to different people's perspective of respect, because people have. We can talk about this another time, but we can talk about like politeness and how politeness varies across cultures and stuff. But yeah, just being aware of what it is to be respectful and going from there.
Yeah, no, I really like that point. And I think, we touched on some of those, more difficult domains to dive into with jargon, but for the most part, people are going to be really excited if you are trying to learn about their culture or their hobbies or anything else. Like whenever I've, tried to learn, I've only had people react really, really positively to that. So I don't think you should let jargon discourage you from trying anything that you really want to do, because at the end of the day, you need to do what makes the most sense for you, what
Hmm.
feels right for you. And it might look a little bit daunting if you're like, oh, there's all these words and things I don't understand. But at the end of the day, if it's something you care about, you'll learn it, and then
Hmm.
sooner than you know it, it'll just be second nature and you forget that you ever even had to learn it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think we've talked about where's the cutoff. What do you decide is like a language versus a dialect versus like a jargon, right? And there's definitely an argument that could be made that learning a jargon is like learning another language. And so a lot of we're not going to dive too far into that today, I don't think. But coming from that perspective of taking some of the things that we've talked about with like language learning principles and applying it to things like jargon is also going to be really helpful. So, take that as you will. It's language all the way down.
Right? And that's a reference to Turtles All the Way Down, which
Which is a whole other layer of referencing and stuff. We'll be talking about idioms and such on another day.
yes, we will. We will. Awesome. Well, should we call that for jargon then?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've gone on a number of good tangents. We've talked about some good stuff. I'm excited to hear. Maybe everyone can share with us. We can maybe put something up in on Instagram, and maybe you can share some of your jargon specific, your domain specific language phrases with us. Maybe you can tell us, just like Raspberry Pis. I didn't really know what that is, but maybe you could tell us about a word or phrase that you use in your life and what it means. And maybe we can learn from each other.
Awesome. Sounds great. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you'll come back for more.
Yay! See you next time, friends.